Imagine spending your entire life following traditions that have been passed down from generation to generation. Every season begins the same way. As soon as the rains stop and the soil becomes workable, tractors roar across the fields, turning the earth upside down. Dust fills the air, and neat rows of freshly plowed land stretch to the horizon. For many farmers, this isn't just a farming method, it's a symbol of hard work. Now imagine one farmer who refuses to do it. Not because he's lazy, not because he can't afford the equipment, but because he believes plowing is actually hurting his land. At first, nobody understands. Neighbors drive past his field every day, shaking their heads. Some laugh openly. Others whisper that he has lost his mind. How can crops grow without plowing? He's throwing away his harvest. Just wait until harvest season. He'll learn his lesson. If you had driven by his farm, you probably would have thought the same thing. Unlike every other field, his land looked untidy. Dry stalks from the previous harvest still covered the ground. There were no freshly turned rows of soil, no clean brown earth, no signs of the heavy work everyone expected. To most people, it looked abandoned, but appearances can be deceiving. The farmer wasn't ignoring his land. He was following a completely different philosophy, one that challenged centuries of farming tradition. And what happened months later surprised almost everyone around him. For thousands of years, people believed that plowing was essential. Ancient civilizations used simple wooden plows pulled by animals. As technology improved, tractors replaced oxen, but the idea remained the same. Turn the soil before planting. It became so common that many people stopped asking why. Sometimes traditions continue not because they're always the best solution, but because they've been repeated for generations. This farmer decided to ask a question that very few people dare to ask. What if the soil works better when we disturb it less? That simple question changed everything. His neighbors couldn't understand it. Every morning, they watched him walk across fields that still looked covered with dead plants from last season. To them, it looked like neglect. But to him, those leftovers weren't rubbish. They were protection. Instead of exposing the soil to the hot sun, the old plant material acted like a natural blanket. It shaded the ground, reduced evaporation, and slowed the impact of heavy rain. But nobody else could see that. All they saw was a farmer refusing to work. The criticism became louder as planting season approached. Other farmers had already finished plowing. Seeds were ready. Machines had completed their work. Yet his field still looked almost untouched. People began making jokes. If you're too tired to farm, just say so. You'll have nothing to harvest. Even family members wondered if he was making a terrible mistake. It's never easy standing alone when everyone else believes you're wrong. Most people would eventually give in to the pressure. They would plow the field simply to avoid the embarrassment. But not him. He trusted something stronger than public opinion. He trusted the science hidden beneath his feet. Although the surface looked messy, something incredible was happening underground. Millions of tiny organisms were busy doing work that tractors could never do. Earthworms dug tunnels that allowed water and air to move through the soil. Fungi formed underground networks that helped plant roots absorb nutrients. Bacteria slowly broke down old plant material into organic matter, feeding the next generation of crops. Without realizing it, nature had been building a healthy soil system for millions of years. Every time soil is aggressively plowed, many of these natural structures are disrupted. The farmer knew this. Most other people didn't. But knowledge isn't always enough to convince others. Results are. And those results would only come after months of waiting. As spring turned into summer, something unexpected began happening. The weather changed. Rain became less predictable. Long dry periods started appearing between storms. Farmers across the area became worried. Freshly plowed fields dried out quickly under the intense sun. Cracks began appearing in the soil. Every day, moisture escaped into the hot air. Meanwhile, the farmer's field looked different. The blanket of crop residue still covered the ground. The soil underneath stayed cooler. It held onto precious moisture for much longer. But nobody celebrated yet. Harvest was still far away. And until harvest came, nobody could say who was truly right. The laughter hadn't completely stopped. The doubters were still waiting for him to fail. The farmer kept working quietly, never arguing, never trying to prove anyone wrong with words. He knew something important. Nature doesn't care about opinions. Nature only responds to how we treat it. And in just a few months, the field itself would reveal the truth. By the middle of the growing season, the laughter had started to fade. Not because anyone admitted the farmer might be right, but because something unusual was happening. The weather had become unpredictable. One week, the sun beat down relentlessly, drying the land until the air shimmered with heat. The next week, dark clouds gathered without warning, releasing heavy rain in just a few hours. For farmers, these extreme changes can determine whether a season ends in profit or loss. Every decision made months earlier suddenly matters. The neighboring farms had prepared their fields the way they always had. They plowed deeply, leaving the soil loose and exposed before planting. At first, everything looked perfect, but after several weeks without rain, problems began to appear. The top layer of soil dried into a hard crust. Young plants struggled because moisture deeper in the ground was becoming difficult to reach. Some fields needed extra irrigation just to keep crops alive. Meanwhile, the farmer who never plowed noticed something different. When he knelt down and pushed aside the layer of old crop residue, the soil underneath still felt cool and slightly damp. That blanket of leftover stalks wasn't just making the field look untidy. It was reducing evaporation by shielding the soil from direct sunlight. Think of it like placing mulch around a garden. The cover helps the ground stay cooler and retain water longer. Crop residue works in a similar way on a larger scale. This is one of the reasons many farmers practicing no-till agriculture report better moisture conservation, especially during dry periods. Still, nobody was ready to admit he had made the right choice. Then came the storm. It wasn't an ordinary rainstorm. Strong winds swept across the fields before heavy rain poured down for hours. Water rushed over the land, carrying away loose soil wherever it could. The next morning, many farmers walked into their fields with heavy hearts. In places where the soil had been left bare, muddy water had carved small channels through the land. Valuable topsoil had been washed away. Topsoil is the most fertile part of the ground. It contains much of the organic matter and nutrients crops depend on. Losing it isn't just a problem for one season. It can reduce productivity for years if it's not replaced. The farmer who refused to plow walked through his own field. The crop residue had slowed the flow of rainwater. Instead of racing across the surface, much of the water soaked into the soil. The earthworm tunnels beneath the ground also helped move water deeper underground. There was very little erosion. His field had passed its first major test. Word began to spread. Some neighbors quietly visited his farm. They didn't come to apologize. They came because they were curious. What exactly are you doing differently? The farmer didn't boast. He simply explained that healthy soil behaves like a living system. When you protect it, it often protects your crops in return. That idea sounded strange to people who had always viewed soil as nothing more than dirt. But soil isn't just dirt. A single handful of healthy soil can contain billions of microorganisms. There are bacteria that recycle nutrients, fungi that connect plant roots through underground networks, earthworms that naturally loosen the soil, tiny insects that break down dead plant material. Together, these living organisms help build soil structure, making it easier for roots to grow and for water to move through the ground. Every season they work without asking for fuel, wages, or maintenance. Nature has been doing this long before tractors existed. That doesn't mean plowing is always wrong. In some situations, tillage can still be useful depending on soil type, climate, weed pressure, and farming goals. But modern agricultural research has shown that reducing unnecessary soil disturbance can improve soil health over time when combined with good management. The farmer understood this. He wasn't trying to avoid work. He was simply choosing a different kind of work. Instead of spending hours turning the soil, he focused on protecting it. He planted carefully. He monitored weeds. He watched moisture levels. He paid attention to what the land was telling him. Weeks turned into months. The crops continued growing. From a distance, something became impossible to ignore. His field looked greener. The plants appeared more uniform. Even during hot afternoons, they seemed less stressed than crops growing in neighboring fields. People began talking. Maybe it's just luck. Maybe his seeds were better. Let's wait until harvest. That phrase spread through the village. Let's wait until harvest. For the first time, even the people who had laughed the loudest weren't completely certain anymore. The season wasn't over. Anything could still happen. A peste outbreak, an unexpected disease, another storm. Agriculture has always been a lesson in patience because no farmer controls the weather. The only thing they control is how they prepare for it. And now, the farmer who had been mocked for refusing to plow was watching his preparation begin to pay off. But the biggest surprise was still ahead. Harvest season finally arrived. For months, the village had watched and waited. Some were hoping the farmer would succeed. Others were quietly expecting him to fail, convinced that ignoring such an old farming tradition would eventually catch up with him. Now, there was nowhere left to hide. The numbers would tell the story. As combines and tractors rolled into the fields, farmers watched carefully. Harvest is more than gathering crops. It's the moment when every decision made throughout the year is tested. The neighboring farmers began harvesting first. Some fields produced decent yields, but many had struggled through the season's drought and heavy rains. In places where erosion had carried away topsoil, plants were weaker. In drier areas, crops had matured unevenly because moisture hadn't lasted as long as expected. Then everyone turned their attention to the field that had sparked so much debate. The farmer who never plowed started his harvest. As the machines moved across the field, people noticed something immediately. The crop stood evenly across much of the land. The soil beneath the residue remained firm rather than powdery. There was less dust rising into the air than many had seen in neighboring fields. By the end of the day, the results were in. The farmer's harvest was strong. In some areas, it matched or exceeded nearby fields. Just as importantly, he had helped preserve his soil, reduced erosion, and retained moisture during a difficult growing season. The people who had laughed months earlier stood quietly. No one was cheering. No one was mocking. They were thinking. One elderly farmer finally broke the silence. "I've been farming for 40 years," he said. "Maybe there's still something new I can learn." That moment mattered more than the harvest itself, because farming has never been about proving someone wrong. It's about learning how to work with nature instead of constantly fighting against it. The farmer smiled. He didn't celebrate by saying, "I told you so." Instead, he invited anyone who was interested to walk through his field. He knelt down and picked up a handful of soil. It was dark. It crumbled gently in his hand. Tiny roots ran through it. Earthworms moved beneath the surface. "This," he said, "is my real harvest." The grain in the storage bins would eventually be sold. But healthy soil could continue producing crops for years to come if it was cared for properly. That is one of the biggest ideas behind conservation agriculture. Instead of asking, "How can I get the biggest harvest this season?" it also asks, "How can I keep this land productive for the next generation?" Researchers around the world have found that practices such as reduced tillage, maintaining soil cover, and rotating crops can improve soil health over time in many farming systems. The exact results depend on climate, soil type, crop choice, and management, but the principle is the same. Healthy soil is one of farmers' greatest assets. The neighbors didn't all switch to no-till farming the next day. Some remained skeptical. Others decided to experiment with just one small field before changing their entire operation. And that's how many improvements in agriculture begin. Not with everyone changing overnight, but with one person willing to test a different idea. The farmer had never asked people to copy him. He simply wanted them to ask a question. What is my soil telling me? Sometimes the answers challenge traditions. Sometimes they confirm them. The important thing is to keep learning. Agriculture has always evolved. People once believed hand tools were the only way to farm. Then came animal-powered plows. Later came tractors. Today, farmers use satellites, drones, GPS guidance, soil sensors, and data analysis to make better decisions. Every generation has discovered something that the previous generation didn't know. So perhaps the greatest mistake isn't trying a new method. Perhaps it's believing there's nothing left to learn. The story of the farmer who never plowed isn't really about plowing. It's about courage. The courage to stay patient when people laugh. The courage to trust evidence over opinions. The courage to let results speak louder than arguments. Because in farming, as in life, the loudest voices are not always the wisest ones. Nature doesn't reward the person who shouts the most. Nature rewards the person who understands it. So the next time you drive past a field that looks different from all the others, don't assume the farmer has made a mistake. Ask why. There may be years of experience, careful observation, and sound science behind what you're seeing. Sometimes the fields that look the strangest today become the ones everyone wants to copy tomorrow. And sometimes the greatest harvest isn't measured only in sacks of grain. It's measured in healthier soil, stronger farms, and a willingness to keep learning. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to discover more surprising farming practices backed by real agricultural science, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next journey into the world of agriculture. Because the best lessons in farming are often hidden beneath the surface.